Okay, so thought this would help you a little bit. This is the end product. Well, a sort of simplified version of the end product. You can see I'm zoomed right out here. But if I zoom myself in, you'll see what I've done. A couple of little things. Let's start at the top corner. What I've done here is I've put in my task. In this imaginary one, I'm making a website for a music store called Tom's. Okay. Um, by the way, you might see these things sometimes. That doesn't mean that something's wrong. It just means that the column's too small to be able to see it. So you see I've zoomed in, and as I zoom in too much, it's too small to see those numbers. So let's zoom out. Anyway, so as you can see, I've put in here my tasks, different little things. What I've decided to do as well is these things like when I'm off on my holiday, so all this here is my holiday. I've chosen a whole different colour, it's grey, it means nothing's going to happen with my project. You saw these last milestones here, but what you didn't see before is how we can show how jobs are interconnected, how they link. Now these are called dependent tasks, so I've put a little example in here. So these tasks are all dependent on each other, and putting in these lines shows you that, well, shows your planner that you're aware that, for example, this is a very key thing. For all of these things to happen, you've got to go and take these photos. So this is a job, obviously, take photos. You can see there, verb, noun combination, take photos. So that's going to happen on the 5th of July. So, and if that doesn't happen on the 5th of July, all of these jobs are going to get delayed. Okay? And putting in that awareness makes you sort of conscious, more conscious of how important it is to get that appointment to go into the shop, in this example, and take those photos. If you don't have the photos, you're not going to be able to do this job, which is to edit them. I've given myself 4 days to edit those jobs. Oops, that went wrong. There we go. I've given myself four days to edit those jobs, those photos. And then during those days, I'm going to be creating these page templates. So in my example, in my website, I'm going to be setting up these templates. Now that job isn't entirely dependent on this. It's going to happen at the same time. So when I get bored of doing some photo editing, I'm going to do some work in Dreamweaver. But you can see that by the time I get to the point where I'm actually creating this home page, both of these jobs and by sort of, default, this job have to have taken place. So they're all starting to get interconnected. Now this really is the power of a Gantt chart. This is where a Gantt chart really comes into its own. It's not just that visual scheduling of the jobs and seeing how they all fit in, but also visually being aware of what jobs depend on others. Now in your case, you're the only person doing this project. Sure, you've got to sort of take into consideration deadlines from the school, and you've got to take into consideration things that your client has to do, but basically it's you. But if there was more than one person working on the project, then this really is supercharged and really comes into its own, because you can then start to see, well, if Johnny doesn't do this job, that's going to affect Jimmy and such like, and so you can really make sure that you're looking at the overview of the whole project and being aware of what jobs affect others. Okay, so that's putting in dependencies between the jobs, and all these are just lines. You can just copy this one here, Control C it, Control V it. That's going to make a sort of a second version of it, and then you just stick it wherever you need to stick it and drag it out. Very simple. Other thing to just be aware of here is I've put in deadlines. Now these are actual, pretty much the deadlines. We're going to have to change them depending on what the rotation is next year once we know it. But things like, for example, completing criteria E for this deadline. Deadline for criteria E is Monday the 26th of August. If we don't have ITGS on that day, it'll be the Tuesday. But that's a pretty big deadline. That's the final project due. Okay, let's scroll over to August time. There we go, there's August, and there's that deadline. Okay, so that deadline is the write-up of criteria A, the documentation, and the final product. Okay. Then I'm starting to be aware that what I'm going to go into during criteria F, which is my client interview again, writing it up. I'm going to get some feedback from criteria E, so this shows me that that time is going to be making improvements, maybe additions, maybe correcting things that haven't worked and such like. Criteria F deadline is Monday the 9th of September, and again, if we don't have ITGS that day, it'll be the Tuesday the 10th. Some revisions of criteria F, and then this date here is the biggie, preparing the final zip folder. So this date here, which is Tuesday the 2nd of October, that is the final project deadline. On this day, you are going to give me this little zipped up folder, and that will be ready to send off to the IB. So there's some deadlines for you. One for the final, one for criteria F, and one for criteria E. So make sure those go into your Gantt chart as well. Okay, thanks. Good. Should give you a good overview of what you're trying to create with this whole thing. So now you just need to start adding those jobs, like we said before, verb, noun, and a bit of detail, and start to also be aware of how they're dependent on each other. Okay, enjoy Ganting.